Hi, this is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic. It's morning in Connecticut right now, but it's afternoon a lot in places in Europe where many people are really interested in this subject because we have the possible death of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And when this is in this podcast, John Richardson and Keith Brenman and I are going to talk about the ways forward after Belgium nixes the U.S. law in favor of the privacy protections of the GDPR. And this is just an incredible situation that really has sprung to a regulatory crisis here. We have an actual regulatory crisis, which sort of warms my heart to know that these regulations are in peril. It warms my heart to know that. Keith, welcome today. Can you tell me, give me a little bit of background about what's going on, what's leading to this crisis right now?
Well, I guess that what's leading to the crisis that you're referring to is that the Belgian, and forgive me, I can't remember the proper name, but the Belgian privacy authorities, if you will, have said that any information going to the United States as it pertains to FATCA cannot be done. It can't be done because it violates the GDPR, which is the General Directive Protection Regulation. And so as a result, we have a member state of the EU who has put the kibosh on this information being sent to the United States. Now, where does that go from there? Well, there's a few different scenarios that can occur. So, like for example, one scenario is that the Belgian government would appeal it,
Yeah.
and if they do appeal it, it would go to the European Court of Justice. Okay, so that's a given right there. The second scenario is that the other member states respond to the complaint and outlaw exchanges. I hate to use the word exchanges because there's no
Right.
reciprocation,
Yeah.
but outlaw the transfer of data from their member states to the United States under FATCA. So therefore, doing the same thing as Belgium. And the third scenario is that a court decision is rendered in context of the appeals in Belgium, France, and Luxembourg, and it goes to the European Court of Justice. What I find interesting is that there is a suit at the European Court of Justice that would include all the member states, but the scenarios that I outlined there, and this is from Fabien, just talking about this, is that there's two directions. You can do it straight at the European Court of Justice, or you can go by member state to member state to member state.
Oh, okay.
And as a result of doing it that way, then it will happen with all of the member states. This is not out of the realm of possibilities because this is the same strategic approach that pharmaceutical companies do when they get their drugs approved in the EU. They
Oh,
have two paths. They
interesting.
can go straight to the European Medicinal Agency, or they can go by member state to member state, and then overall it gets approved with all the member states.
Oh, wow.
So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Oh, my.
Um, Voila,
Yeah, it's
that's
fascinating.
where that status is right at the moment. Now, in the short term, and I'll leave it at this. In the short term, is there might be some immediate negotiation with the Belgian authorities in the U.S. to work something out, but
Mm.
that does
Mm.
not preclude it continuing on with the other member states and continuing on to the European Court of Justice.
Right, and we have Jenny in the UK. She's got her own back,
That's right.
so
That's
she's
right.
doing one of those too. So
Right.
she's
And I
got her
forget
own.
that because the UK is no longer part of the EU.
Oh,
So
right,
they
yeah,
have their own thing going on now.
yeah, right
So,
on,
yes. Yeah.
right on. That's right. Okay,
So,
fantastic.
voila.
So yeah, you talked about the scenarios that are basically here. Here's the three scenarios that you were talking about here. That can happen. I want to move over to John Richardson. He has this tweet here, and I think this is an important tweet here to truly recognize what's going on. John, can you help explain what you meant by this and why this is so important? This tweet you have here about what happens when a country signs a tax treaty with the U.S. that includes a savings clause. Explain what you meant by this.
Well, let me start with a conclusion. Um, the combination of those two things means that these countries have signed their sovereignty over to the U.S. Treasury. That's the bottom line. Now let me explain why that is. Okay. The first point is that if a country has a tax treaty, many do. For example, Brazil does not, interestingly, a country that's leading the charge in the de-dollarization thing, right? Interestingly, okay. But a country that has a tax treaty with the United States that includes the standard saving clause, has simply agreed, and let this sink in, okay, that the United States can impose worldwide taxation, forms, penalties, etc., on any resident of that country who is a U.S. citizen. Okay, I mean it's very, very, very clear, very clear. Okay, you sign this treaty. Okay, the saving clause. What it means is that anybody in the country who is a U.S. citizen is subject to U.S. regulation. Okay, now that's really, really important. First thing, and notice by the way, who defines, all right, who's a U.S.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
It's very, very important. And this manifests itself in the second thing, the FATCA IGA, which, I've included right there, the meaning of a U.S. person, right there. I'm not making this up, is interpreted according to the Internal Revenue Code. All right.
Right.
So we have a situation here where very, very plainly the country says, yes, we agree that the United States can impose its regulatory regime and taxation on anybody, any resident of our country who is a U.S. citizen. And two, we agree that the United States can define who is a U.S. citizen. Okay. So really, they've signed over, I would say their sovereignty, because once you let, your tax sovereignty go, I think you've let pretty much a good deal of your sovereignty go. But this is all secret. Of course, nobody would see it this way, right? But, why let what the law and the treaties actually say interfere with it, right?
Wow. I got to say, that was, John, that was beautiful. That was so quick how you explained exactly what you said.
Yeah.
You sign a tax treaty with the U.S. that includes that standard savings clause. You just gave it up. You just gave up your country to the United States, not even to the United States of America, but just to the U.S. Treasury. You didn't even give it up. You just give it up to one administrator, one bureaucracy of the U.S. government. You didn't even give it up to the United States government. Really. So you've become a ward of the U.S. Treasury. That's really what it is when you do that. So
I think that's right. And I think that gradually some of these countries it's beginning to dawn on them, the stupidity of what they've done.
Yep. And I really hope some of those the people who are in charge of making policy in the EU would watch this so they could understand.
Well, they should,
we're laying it out.
I'll explain it to them again. All right. But I mean, as Ronald Reagan used to say in one of his greatest speeches, facts are stubborn things. Those are the facts.
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about let's talk about the next thing here. And let's not that yet, but I want to talk about, so John, what can Belgium do right now? Why don't you go over
right.
what do we got here for okay. not the negotiations, John. Let's talk about what can they do?
Exactly. So the question is right now, I mean, understand, okay, that there is no room for negotiation here in terms of what this stuff says, because the FATCA IGAs and FATCA is for the purposes of one, not allowing a U.S. citizen to be able to have a bank account outside the United States without it being reported to the IRS. That's the first purpose of it. And the second is to ensure that the rights of any U.S. citizen stop at the U.S. border. In other words, to prevent any U.S. citizen from picking up any rights because they live outside the United States that might be afforded to another country. So where we are, a resident of another country. So where we are it's real simple. FATCA says, you give us this information based on their being U.S. citizens. The decision in Belgium, and I reference specifically paragraph 178 to keep it simple, says, any bulk transfer based on citizenship alone violates the GDPR. Now, it says other things as well, but let's just focus on that, because once it violates the GDPR. So what we have is It's sort of like irresistible force meets a movable object. Okay, there is no way this can be reconciled. So the question then becomes, what should various countries do within that context? Now, here are Belgium's options. One, ensure there are no U.S. accounts. Okay, now the obvious way to do that would be simply to prohibit any U.S. citizen in Belgium from having a bank account. Now, I understand the cry, but under European law, they're entitled to a bank. I'll get to that in a minute, okay? But the first point is just say, no U.S. citizen have a bank account. A second way to do it is this, that if anybody bothered to read the statute or any of this stuff, all right, what you would find is that what is excluded from the definition of a U.S. account is what's called a depository account. Or that's a basic bank account, checking, saving, a depository account that keeps the balance below 50,000 US dollars. So what they also could do would be to simply, now remember, the point is that these are not US accounts, therefore they're by definition not reportable. So what they do is they restrict US citizens to a depository account with a balance below 50,000, and they program their computer to have an automatic shutoff at the point it reaches 49,999. So it can never hit the $50,000 thing ever. And this would keep it outside the definition of a US account. Okay? And all right, so those are the two things they can do. And of course, the problem is the FATCA applies to a foreign financial institution. So a third thing they might do is just ensure that there are no foreign financial institutions in Belgium. And I have a very simple fix for that.
Yeah.
They just become Belgium just becomes a US territory.
Right. I mean, exactly.
Why not? They've already signed over their sovereignty anyway.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
It's obviously not a big, again, it's just not a big deal to these countries to sign away to give up their country. Go all the way, right?
It's better than that. Okay, because now under the current statute, it would appear the Treasury could designate a territory as a foreign country, but they haven't done that. And there's no indication they will. But just imagine for a minute that Belgium says, well, we see the problem, and the best thing is just to not have any foreign financial institutions so you can't sanction us. So could we please become a U.S. territory? But then it gets even better. Because remember how the taxation of U.S. territories work. For example, a U.S. citizen who lives only in American Samoa, for example, right, would not pay tax on American Samoan source income, all right? However, a U.S. citizen in France has to pay tax on French source income. So becoming a territory and using the same taxation rules as the other territories, they would have the benefit of income sourced in Belgium not being subject to U.S. taxation. So, I mean, I think that this could be, a very, very smart move to formalize the signing over of sovereignty.
Man. Oh, that's hilarious.
So that's what Belgium can do. Those are the three things Belgium can do.
All right, well, let's see. Let's talk about a good old U.S. What can the good old U.S. of A. do here out of this jam that they're in here?
Right. Now, this is very interesting. The U.S. has actually a number of options, and it really depends on whether it's going to be honest about what it's trying to do here, whether it's really going to be honest. Now, on this point, I think is, I realized this in the last few days or so more consciously, but what the United States is doing is abusing its own citizens and trying to make it seem like it's other countries who are abusing the citizens, right? Okay, agreed? I mean, this is...
Boy, that sounds...
yeah.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Citizenship taxation. It's pure abuse from the United States of America, but wink, wink, we're going to make it seem like it's the other country that's doing the abusing. So the question is whether they want to, face up to that. But here are some things they can do. I think now Robert Goulder wrote an interesting article in Tax Notes on June the 5th, and it's making it rounds online. And I think that people ought to look at it because, he makes the point that citizenship taxation is the root of the thing, which, by the way, I think is correct. So the first thing the U.S. could do is simply amend. So I mean, it's a little bit complicated, but at its root, it applies to specified U.S. accounts or accounts held by U.S. persons. So if you change the definition of U.S. person to exclude citizens, right, to exclude citizens and make it just residents or something like that, you basically solve the problem from a legislative perspective altogether. Okay, FATCA would still apply to U.S. residents with accounts in Belgium, et cetera. But
Oh, right. Yeah.
so that could be done. All right, that could be done, and actually, that would be the honest way, to do this. Okay, but I don't think we would expect anything that's honest coming from Congress or Treasury. I really doubt it. Okay. Now, the second thing they could do, and this is really, I think this sort of same country exemption type of thing, would be change. Oh, by the way, also note that for the first solution to exclude citizens from the definition of U.S. person, okay, that ends the abuse of foreign financial institutions as well. Okay. But here, same country exemption, change the definition of U.S. account to exclude accounts held by residents of foreign countries. Well, that sounds great in theory, and I know that a lot of U.S.-centric thinkers would support that. But the problem is it still leaves the burden on the banks, to try to figure this out. And I don't think they're going to. My advice to all
it creates a bigger problem trying to fix it. It actually
all
does.
U.S. citizens all the time. Now, the third thing is, and this is what I've been advocating for years, because this is, 4 or 5 years ago, I collaborated with Dr. Albert and Dr. Snyder on this article, A Regulatory Fix for Citizenship Taxation, doing another one called A Treaty Fix for Citizenship Taxation. And here's how that would work. We understand the saving clause is a big part of the problem here. And the saving clause includes exemptions to the saving clause. Now, at present, the problem is that, see, if you're a green card holder and you go to, say, France, you can use what's called a treaty tie-break provision to be treated as a resident of France, but not of the United States. But U.S. citizens don't have that option. Okay, they can't use a treaty tie-break to shift their residency. So what you want to do is you either amend the saving clause, or more specifically, what you do is you add as an exception to the saving clause the treaty tie-break provision, so that a U.S. citizen genuinely living outside the United States who was a tax resident of the other country could use the tax treaty to essentially be treated as a resident of that other country and not the United States. Now this is great stuff, I think. And I think it's the right way to do this because, first of all, the United States believes in citizenship taxation. They believe in it, okay? And for them to change that, I think they might not even recognize who they are anymore, all right? As sort of an identity. When you fly into the United States, welcome to America, the land of citizenship taxation. School children every morning, instead of saying, my country 'tis of thee, my country CBT, America might not even recognize it.
I love it.
This allows, the United States to retain citizenship taxation, but essentially mute the impact of it by allowing people to use the treaty to become a tax resident of another country. But that's going to involve either getting rid of the saving clause, which I don't think they'll want to do, or adding an exception to the list of things in the saving clause so that citizens as well as green card holders can become treaty non-residents. Okay, so that's the third thing. The fourth thing, and this is what I think they're most likely to do, honestly, ignore the whole goddamn thing. Okay, who gives a damn what Belgium does? Who's Belgium anyway? What is that place? So who cares what they do? Now, that I think would actually work for them. And the reason I think it would work is that right now, all of this has to take place within the context of the FATCA IGAs. Now, you can have non-compliance 24/7 under the FATCA IGAs, but unless the United States gives a formal notice of non-compliance, it makes no difference at all. So I think what Treasury is likely to do for the foreseeable future is ignore the whole thing, meaning not giving, they're aware of it, sure, but not give formal notice of non-compliance. And by not giving a formal notice of non-compliance, they just accept the information or lack thereof that comes from Belgium and say nothing. And because they haven't changed the terms of the IGA, then other countries would not have the benefit of a different IGA, right? So, if I were advising Treasury, I would say, you know what? It's Belgium. Just ignore the whole goddamn thing. Okay. All right.
Oh, by the way, I just want to give a shout out to people viewing. We're going to get to the comments after we finish this up. So please ask your comments. I see we have some from Suzanne. We'll hit those when we're done with this. So please, comment. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Now, solution 5. All right. Now, the reason why I think this should at least be proposed is that really what's going on with this whole FATCA thing is, again, it's the U.S. wants to abuse its own citizens, but make it seem like it's the other country doing the abuse and pass the cost of abusing their own citizens directly onto the other country.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't seem fair, does it? I mean, like you want to beat your wife, don't make me pay for it. You incur the cost of that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this next solution, all right, would be one that moves the costs where they should be to the United States and away from the other countries. And that is, okay, very, very simply. I mean, think about this. Why try to rein in these foreign banks who have the temerity to allow a U.S. citizen to open a bank account? Why not just have a proclamation in the United States that prohibits all U.S. citizens under all circumstances from maintaining any kind of account with a foreign financial institution? All right. Right. So you do that. But of course, people will say, well, then I can't leave the United States. Oh, not so. Because earlier I proposed that really, if the U.S. wants to have the citizenship taxation in FATCA, at the very least, it should have the decency to set up financial institutions for the United States citizens wherever they may be in the world. So what happens is the U.S. establishes the FATCA Bank and Trust, requires all U.S. citizens to have accounts at that bank and that bank only. In other words, the foreign banks are off the hook for the simple reason that the U.S. prohibits its citizens from having any kind of financial accounts at those banks. And this would be great because the whole point is that, this particular bank, we'll call it the FATCA Bank and Trust, could have a direct link right to the IRS. There would be no need for any kind of, information reporting whatsoever. And the reason why American citizens would surely support this would be there'd no longer be any need for FBAR. Right?
Wow.
So they could see this as, oh, good. If I can only bank at FATCA Bank and Trust, I no longer have to worry about FBAR and things like that. Now that might upset Treasury because, as we know, FBAR penalties are a pretty decent fundraiser there, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, why not?
They don't want to give up their fundraiser.
Just prohibit Americans because they're Americans from having a bank account at anything other than a U.S. bank. I mean,
I want to ask our viewers which of these solutions
shouldn't this be sold as being necessary to preserve their freedoms?
Seems necessary, right? Well, I want to ask I think you've laid it out great because I think you're right, John. To me, the most likely thing that would happen would be solution 4, just doing nothing. That's the thing that's the safest. Curious if our viewers would agree, because if you look at all the other things here, that's a lot going on, and 4 is just doing the least amount, and just like, we're just not going to do that, and we're not going to file a notice of noncompliance, because if we do that, that's going to create a whole storm that we don't want to deal with. So we'll just ignore it, and that is often the best way to ignore. If there's things you don't like, you just don't talk about it.
That's what I think the most likely scenario is. I think it makes sense. I think it keeps the general reign of terror going, which I think is important. And basically it doesn't formally give other countries the benefit of this either. Because what happens, for example, if the IGA gets changed and somehow, American citizens resident in another country aren't subject to, what happens in Canada, for example, right? Then these countries would have the benefit of the same FATCA IGA. So yes, what Treasury should do is simply ignore this. Maybe do something like, put together some kind of punishment, for Belgium, you as a trade deal or something like that, but generally leave the FATCA IGAs intact and just don't give notice of noncompliance.
Yeah, that seems to. I think that's going to be the most likely thing that happens from the U.S. You know that now, and this is just something that I would want to bring up to people negotiating the EU when you're discussing. This is how simple there is a fix if we just follow the law. If we look at the actual law, 26 U.S. Code 1471, withholdable payments to foreign financial institutions, we look at C2. Says the holder of such account is otherwise subject to information reporting requirements, which the secretary determines would make the reporting required by this section with respect. Let me remove with respect to the United States accounts duplicative. Well, it all is duplicative. I mean, none of it's needed. I mean, it's duplicative and triplicative reporting that only exists to create penalties. So, if I was in Belgium and I was negotiating with the US, I'm like, well, your law allows you to not do this if it's duplicative. So let's count the many ways this information is reported, either by the many ways the taxpayer has to report it. And so I think that's a fix that we have right there. Now, I don't know, that seems like a tough one. I think number 4 would be the most realistic to do there. Okay, I want to move over to some comments that we have here. Suzanne says this: the bank still sent this year's information to the FOD. What's the FOD? What is she referring to? Is that the Keith? Do you know what what's the F?
No, I don't know what the FOD is. Suzanne,
Yeah,
please comment on what the FOD is.
Yeah, let us know what the FOD is. Below reporting threshold 2 and no longer need to use citizen in the Belgian ruling. So it's still happening, even though she's below the threshold to no longer use citizen in there's a Belgian ruling. Okay, well, I guess there's the other possibility. It just continues. There's a ruling and everyone ignores it. She says this. The response she received years ago to the changing of the definition of U.S. person from citizen to resident was that it would require a constitutional amendment.
That's absolutely idiotic.
Yeah.
Who said that?
Yeah, right. Which is and she mentioned departments of finance. I think the Department of Finance.
Absolutely idiotic.
Yeah, I mean that we just went over. We just showed you exactly the multiple ways a constitutional amendment is. Oh my God, that person. Yeah, they're just really BSing.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
Yeah, right. An amendment to change it. What? It's divine. If a citizen is defined by a regulation, it's defined by a regulation.
Yeah.
I don't tell you. Yeah. Oh my God. All right. So what is next here in store here? What's going to be happening next, Keith? Well, we went over what's the possibilities.
Well, I think the next is going to be those scenarios, but I have to concur with, there was something that John said that I have to concur with that kind of changes one of the scenarios about the short-term negotiation thing. I liked what John said about that in regards to any semblance of some short-term negotiation. I don't know what that would be, because it's two diametrically opposed laws, if you will.
Yeah.
So, I just don't see what negotiation is going to happen. What negotiation is going to happen? I think some of the things that John wrote, I don't think will happen, but they are logical next steps for Belgium to do. So it'll be interesting to see. But like I said, this is moving forward. We got France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, and Luxembourg moving forward with their complaints. And this is going to be at the European Court of Justice. So it will be interesting to see if FATCA falls in Europe. What does that mean for all the other countries?
Right.
What does that mean for Jenny's lawsuit?
Right.
What does that mean in regards to CBT, which is the genesis of this whole mishigas?
Okay,
which means mess.
Yeah, that would solve the whole thing. But I'd like to make one other point on this that I think is important. People talk about, well, we're going to have a conversation with the U.S. Treasury. We're going to have a negotiation. We're going to sit down across the table and talk to them. But I would point out that they are restricted by the plain terms of the statute, Section 1471 of the Internal Revenue Code. that's what provides the basis for them being able to do much of anything, really. And I think that people would do well to have a look at what the statute actually says.
Yeah.
This is as plain as day. Well, after you've read it 10 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Plain as day in section 1471 that the whole point of the thing is to prohibit any U.S. citizen from having a bank account outside the United States without being it reported to the IRS, and to make sure that they can't benefit from any additional privacy rights or anything like that. So I think Treasury's hands are completely tied.
I do. Yeah.
I think they're completely tied. I don't think there's anything that, if they're really honest, because
Right.
if they're really honest, I don't think that there's anything they can do, because I think they're clearly restricted. What was that case you always talk about, Anthony? The something power case, that administrative law case, right? Anyway, look, the point is Treasury can't do what they're not allowed to do under the statute, right? And the point is the statute itself, is very clear, in its intent. And I think that, I think the U.S. actually has got itself boxed into a corner on this.
Right.
And I think, the only honest solution from them is to get rid of citizenship taxation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, and Mike has the correct.
No. Go ahead.
He's got the, and this is, and I think, here's really the problem I see with negotiation. Like why can't work? Because no negotiation can only underline, heighten, whatever, point the fact that this is you can't reconcile this. You can't.
Right.
They really can't. So that's why you're better off is not negotiating. That's why I think it's ignoring it is where you're better off. Oh, because it wasn't a big deal, and therefore if we don't act, if the U.S. Treasury doesn't act like it's a big deal, it can still get all these other ones around. And hey, look, you still have Asia, you still have Australia. Hey, there's still a lot of misery around the world. Let's losing a few smaller countries. And
that's right. But remember, they could retaliate against Belgium in another way. Okay. I mean, outside the context of FATCA, they could just decide they don't like Belgium, right? Or they could pressure Belgium to become a U.S. territory.
Yeah.
Right.
Why not just annex Belgium? That would solve the problem as well, wouldn't it?
Right. But, at the end of the day, it's not going to be just Belgium. And I think if anybody knows about the European Union and its structure in the U.S., it's going to be against the EU. And that's going to be a tall order.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tall order.
I think that this occurs at an interesting time, sort of in terms of what's going on in the world with the the result of the Ukraine thing. Among many, is that it's called attention to the problem of U.S. sanctions.
Yep.
I think in a way that perhaps what is not as clear previously. And hey, I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. Okay. Citizenship taxation is a sanction, a 24/7 sanction against the rest of the world. FATCA is a 24/7 sanction against the rest of the world. I mean, seriously, okay, let's stop that nonsense about this being some necessary thing to curb tax. I mean, come on,
right? Yeah, come on, right?
Comment that is right.
Yeah. So I think you have Mike having a comment, right, Anthony? Mike?
Yeah, Mike just as he goes. Mike loves, and I think we all really appreciate the depth of John's analysis, and I certainly do too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been a primary beneficiary of it. I got to say, I've really, I've become kind of an expert on this just listening to John.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, I'm talking about the logic of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
I hear you.
I'm not actually recommending that the United States annex Belgium or that Belgium should, call it.
Right. You're just showing what has to be done.
I'm just pointing out that the absolute lunacy of these laws, okay?
Yeah, you're showing the absurdity of it all.
This is where it takes you.
Yeah.
And this is why, you cannot allow these morons in Congress to make tax laws, okay? I mean, they're indescribable morons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's just here we have here's some Suzanne has a story for us here. She had here's an update. Look at this. Belgium has already has certain financial institutions created just for U.S. citizens. As a friend of mine found out after he went to get a loan from his regular bank, where he was a long-term customer, he was denied and told to go to a broker where they told him that X bank would do the loan at a higher interest rate. There we
Yep.
go.
Yep.
Okay. Oh well, that's nice here. I mean, that's really something here, right? And wow, that's wow. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Let's continue the screwing of Americans
Yeah,
overseas.
right. I mean, there it
No,
is, right?
On Suzanne's comment here, which is kind of interesting. I mean, just to bring in a little more context here, and ACAs and American Citizens Abroad wrote up an article about this decision, which I thought was quite interesting. And they reminded me when I was reading it about Notice 2023-11. I mean, just recently in this Notice 2023-11, I think we even talked about it, right? I mean, the U.S. laid out further conditions on these countries, to facilitate this whole FATCA thing, right? And you may recall last fall, a representative of U.S. Treasury wrote the ambassador for Netherlands, making it very, very clear that in the context of this FATCA thing, that it was the intention of the United States to impose worldwide taxation on their residents, who Treasury deemed to be U.S. citizens. So let's not kid ourselves here, okay? This is the context. This is what it's about. And, I think what's great is not so much the decision in Belgium, which I think is entirely predictable, hardly revolutionary, okay? But the fact that it has started the discussion in a way that illuminates, FATCA, citizenship taxation, and how they relate. And, my hope is that 10 years from now, people will be looking at Anthony's podcast and saying, by God, this is proof positive we're being abused by Treasury.
Yeah. Well, and I think I would say this is the biggest benefit of the Belgium decision is that, wait a second, are you saying the GDPR is better than the nothing we have in the United States? And that's really the problem. Again, I mentioned the office of the OMB hack of 2015. Bunch of stuff hacked. Nothing was ever done about it. And I think that's the bigger thing. Well, why is, the question people should be asking, well, wait a second, why doesn't it comply? And that's kind of the frightening thing. And so now we could truly see, wait a second, I am sorry, there are better protections in the EU than the United States. The United States, we don't have the same privacy protection. We are being denied. And that's what
true.
It shows. The conflict is there's a conflict between EU law and US law. Well, it's showing EU law is better. And now we can't, okay, that's out of the bag now.
I think Treasury would disagree. I mean, the problem is this, what's fascinating is, again, as you know, I always begin by looking at the legislation on this stuff, right? Now, there's two heads to FATCA, right? One going after the foreign banks, the other going after, American citizens directly. But what's interesting right there in the legislation, there are provisions to deal with a situation where a U.S. citizen might be able to advantage some kind of foreign law that gives them an enhanced right of privacy or something like that. And in both cases, it very specifically denies, right, the right of anybody outside or any institution outside the United States to have a level of privacy that doesn't exist in the United States. And this is by legislation, not interpretation.
Yeah, but how? But I hear that it's written down there, but the arrogance of the U.S. How do they expect that? They expect all these countries to fall in line with that U.S. law in their countries.
We have so far.
Well, that's just their.
Well, that's true.
But
yes,
they did sign on to this, and they have signed on to this.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I think, Keith, that you need to become a permanent ambassador, going from country to country, demanding, making presentations to the legislative bodies of all of saying, why have you signed over your sovereignty to the U.S. Treasury?
Why?
Yeah.
Right. And final comment from Suzanne here. I think this is a great place to close up. The banks already had, right, various measures in place to flag suspicious transactions.
Yes.
Totally. Right.
Absolutely.
Is it perfect? No. And I mean, that's just the way things are. And I mean, the reasons why they're not perfect is because of corruption. I mean, let's be honest. That's why somebody's bribing someone. Okay. So it's like, that's always going to be that's when you're undermining the system by bribing and corrupting it. Well, the system isn't going to be perfect. No law can sustain that. But here it is. No, FATCA is just an abuse of power and not a tool to commit criminal activity. Right. Yeah, that absolutely. There you go. I mean, it is just not in a million, it doesn't even combat, tax evasion, the tax gap, whatever their mythical numbers they come up with. It doesn't do any of that. It just, it makes it.
What it does is it imposes a regulatory cost in other countries. Okay.
Yes.
Always the advantage of the United States to increase, operating costs. And it certainly does that. There was one other thing I forgot, though. The other thing that, and if this does not come to some reasonable solution, the future is that there's no way that any country can afford to allow a U.S. citizen to live there. They got to get rid of them.
They got to get rid of them.
Absolutely.
All right. There it is. All right. Well, we are going to be watching this situation. Be sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications so that you know when we're going live and then you can join and participate in with us. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you both so much to Keith and John and our viewers. We've had a ton of interest in this, and we actually could start to see. I'm actually starting to see there actually could be a death to FATCA. We'll keep monitoring this and keep you guys up to date. Until then, this is Anthony Pear for John Richardson and Keith Redmond. I thank you for watching.
Put up a poll, which solution they think is.
All right, yeah. Put up a poll. Yeah, guys, I don't know if you could put in the comments, which solution do you think, and I'll go back to the slide here. Let me finish with that. Which solution do you think here? Let me just hide that there. Which solution of the four here do you think will happen? So we got one. We think, John, I think we think solution 4 is the most likely. Curious to what.
I'll bet on solution 4.
What solution?
4, ignore it.
Yeah.
Giving notice of non-compliance under the FATCA IGA, everything basically stays in place. They just don't get, information from U.S. citizens resident in Belgium. The word comes out, they will all flock to Belgium. In the same way that in the late 60s, Americans flocked to Canada.
Yeah.
In 2023 and 24, they will flock to Belgium.
Wonderful.
A FATCA-free zone.
FATCA-free zone, yeah.
Isn't this hilarious?
Oh,
it
man.
really is. It's sad, but it's hilarious.
Well, guys,
I'd like to ask the two of you a question.
No, sure, you got it.
Okay.
Do you think this crisis is the cause of Belgium? Do you think Belgium has caused this? Honestly.
I guess, well, in a way, I was surprised. I was surprised by this decision that Belgium had the gall to rebel against the United States.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I look at. I look at it as a rebellion. Like, well, you're supposed to know where you're supposed to be, Belgium. You're a satellite of the U.S. and you exist only as a safety zone, as a no man's land between the United States and Russia. So just do what you're supposed to do and shut up. How dare you think you're a real country?
What occurs to me is, I mean, obviously we weren't around, in 1776 or 1775, but I wonder if King George would have seen the rebellion in the United States as sort of an analogy, right? I mean, do you think that this could be, look, this is extreme disobedience on the part of Belgium.
Right, exactly. Exactly. That was like, how can you do this? Don't you know you're owned by the United States government? That's what, okay, well, you're your own country, I guess. You decided to be your own country. Well, good for you. Congratulations.
Right. The Belgian Tea Party.
Yeah, right. The Belgian decides to be their own country. It's amazing. We got some votes in here. Oh wow. Okay. So all right, we got some results already. We'll share. We'll share these before we go. Suzanne would love to see 1, but fears 5 will be the answer. Right.
Back of bank and trust. I actually think that that's the second best solution.
Yeah.
Because I think that the part of the problem here is, this is so offensive in so many ways, But in a way, the most offensive aspect of FATCA and citizenship taxation is how the U.S. is expecting the rest of the world to incur the financial cost of its efforts to abuse its own citizens, right? I mean, that really is over the top.
Yeah, it is.
Soviets ever expect the United States to pick up the cost of abusing its own citizens? No. Has any other country? I mean, this is like new stuff altogether.
It's really something. Oh, we got Cindy. Cindy said thinks number 2 would be okay. She's hoping to change the definition of U.S. account to exclude accounts held by residents of foreign countries. I think we just have problems with that because, now we have another layer of analysis to do before we determine if somebody could,
That's a very U.S. centric answer. Okay.
And no disrespect to Cindy, it's just is.
Comment on you on here.
Yeah, I mean, it would work, but it's a very U.S. centric answer.
Yeah, I think there's problems. Right.
Banks of having to decide who's a U.S. person.
It only creates more work for the foreign banks. Yeah. And you have a chance for something to go wrong. And somebody be whacked with some stupid penalty.
Exactly. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. That's what the bank should be doing.
Yeah. And then she's she also commented. Someone in Norway has said they would like the U.S. system as all the really rich are moving to Switzerland to avoid taxes. All the really rich get things we can't do. They also, if you're really rich, the tax haven to be in is the United States of America. By the way. Exactly. The number one global tax haven is number one. Yeah. And then Mike has a comment. Mike's comment here is, where's Mike's comment? Where I just had it. Maybe the USA will drop on Belgium like a ton of bricks just to make an example, right?
No, not a chance.
Yeah.
No, not a chance. I mean, I think that what the U.S. does, right, through the Treasury regs and that is, I mean, it's very abusive, but a critical part of it is to hide the abuse, right? Yeah. To make it seem like it's the other country that's doing the abuse. I mean, in the first FATCA lawsuit, I mean, I think part of the judge's decision was this had to do with account closure. It's not the U.S. that's causing the bank accounts to be, it's the other country.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, this is, necessary to reinforce the U.S. mindset. So, no, I don't think they're going to do anything like that at all.
I look at Belgium as the Pandora's box that has been opened because at the end, because other member states are going to follow suit. And if you remember, what's the last thing that's left in Pandora's box? Hope. And I think this is something that can create a lot of hope that FATCA will go away. That's how I look at it.
Well, we have, I want to finish with a comment by Cindy, who's joined us today. And this is, I think, that really the way it goes. Her comment's pretty simple, straightforward. Why can't everyone just pay taxes to their residence country, no matter the citizenship?
Let me give an answer to that.
Yeah.
Closing comment. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
All right. The world of international tax is unbelievably complex. And when we talk about this stuff, we're just playing around in the sandbox. Okay. I mean, it's unbelievably complex. But, in my effort to simplify my own thinking about this, I asked myself one day, I mean, what is international tax about anyway? I mean, it's insane, right? And really, there's a very simple answer, and that is that the whole system of international tax is because most countries of the world want to find a way to tax economic activity that has nothing to do with their country. I mean, every aspect of it, that's all it is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Cindy asked, I think, an important question here. And the answer is, sure, everybody should pay tax to their residence country. Okay, but the question is tax on what kind of income? And as long as other countries want to reach outside their country into another country and tax that stuff, you're going to have problems. And the United States is the world leader in this. I mean, it's so crazy that they've got the rest of the world to agree to the global minimum tax, and they still haven't bothered to step up to do it. They've added the cost. They've downloaded more costs where they sit around bickering and you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
Oh my God, amazing. I want to thank our viewers today, and I thank you all so much for the comment again. Thanks to Keith and John so much. A great episode. We will see you next week. Not sure what we're going to hit next week, and This has just been an amazing day. One more final comment I'll show, and then we'll go. Here's a solution. All taxes, fines, and other penalties imposed on EU residents are reimbursed. Oh, there you go. Here's a solution for you. There you go. You look for reimbursement by the resident held by withdrawing.
Well, actually, I have a comment on that. As well.
All right.
Very quickly on that. I assume that's sort of, a half serious, whatever. But I'd like to add this, that one of the solutions to this problem that I think is a reasonable solution, we look at the whole renunciation issue. I mean, a lot of people would like to not be U.S. citizens. Many of them can't afford it. But what about a country like France or Canada or whatever to say, look, this whole citizenship stuff is too big of a problem. And rather than have the problem of our dual citizens having to negotiate renunciation all the time it takes, what we would like to do is negotiate a buyout of dual citizens from the United States. Simply buy them back, so to speak, right? In one transaction. People could just sign up, pay the U.S. $1,000 per citizen instead of $223.50. They get
both rate, get it like a both
higher volume. I mean, the U.S. it'd be a win-win situation. The U.S. could make money by selling its citizens off.
Oh yeah.
I mean, why not? Why not? I mean, the answer is because then we have to recognize what's really going on.
Right.
Okay. But I think the time has come to recognize what's really going on. The United States treats its citizens as property. I mean, that is an indisputable fact, I think.
Absolutely right. All right. Well, thanks again, guys. Thanks so much for the commenters, and we'll see you next time.